Okay, and we are back. Going over to somewhere in Asia now. Let's find out where the gentleman is. He is Yoichi Shimatsu, our colleague and one of the world's truly great environmental reporters, analysts, researchers, who has dedicated a life and a career to trying to make this planet better. Where are you, Yoichi?
Well, I'm back in Thailand. I got back from Malaysia and then this long trip through Fukushima. Really need to recover now, feeling something like an invalid. The effects of Fukushima, not just the radiation, air, and then and really, as much as you can control your diet, you can't control everything, things are going to slip through. You do get hungry. There's places where you don't have a lot of available food choices. And plus with a large chain and cheaper food outlets, and you really don't know the sourcing of your food. That's one of the scandals of our time. As I think many American consumers realize, you really don't know where your food is produced.
Not a chance. Not only do they not know where it's produced, but they don't know what the hell's in it. Right.
Yeah, and sometimes, I think in Japan there's a lot of mislabeling, as I mentioned to you last time, about oysters.
It's all money.
And their origin, and you just better stay away from that whole. But the problem is there's so many food categories that you have to stay away from that it does sort of affect your health. For example, bicycling around Fukushima takes a lot of energy, and the amount of protein you get in Japan is very, very, very small. So you're going to wear out your body. And then also the other insidious effect of Fukushima is weather change, Right now you have this climate change conference going on in Doha, Qatar, but the reality is Fukushima has really altered the weather, especially in the northern hemisphere. Everyone was noticing we had, I think, 1 day of autumn this year in Japan. And it went from very hot and wet down to very, very brutally cold and windy. So, this is, the United States has seen tremendous disruptions to its weather, as we see now in England, massive flooding in England. So, that basically means, I went to Fukushima at the time that I thought it would be dry, still somewhat warm, not freezing, and instead got blasted by rain and then freezing temperatures, which actually affected my health, and which also, when you get hammered by all these weather changes, it tends to cover. You can't really discern so much the effects of radiation in your body because you're just being hammered by so many things. And this certainly was true in Sendai, where I took a lot of measurements of radiation in people's bodies just by the wet spots in the warmer wet, like in your underarm or in the crook of your elbow, on the inside crook of your elbow. Mm-hmm. People were very surprised. One lady from Mie Prefecture, which is very far to the south and on the Black Sea, really low readings. Other people from Fukushima, varying degrees of, I would say, readings high enough to be concerned about, to a woman in Sendai who runs a guest house. Now, she never goes outdoors. She says she never works up a sweat, doesn't do a lot of exercise. She had the highest reading of everybody, okay? And this is in sort of the larger radiation zone outside Fukushima. Her husband, who's a chef, he goes outside fishing, he goes outside running, he does a lot of outdoors work. He had a lower reading. So,
how strange.
Their diet is exactly the same.
What do you, okay.
Sitting around indoors, there's no protection. In fact, unless people go outdoors and get more exercise, and work up a sweat, will have less radiation in their body.
I would suggest that indoor air often doesn't get exchanged with the outside very often, and things can concentrate,
That's right. Then people come in tracking the stuff in, dirt builds up, and so on and so forth. Moisture builds up inside all the linens and all. So basically, the indoors become sort of like a sponge for radiation. And so really it's important to maintain really healthy exercisers, especially, and unfortunately, saunas are not prevalent in Japan, and this is what we really need to get more people to do. And I've been talking to people about trying to install saunas. They've got to sweat out this radiation, because otherwise we're just overtaxing our kidneys, our livers, our organs, And that is really bad because that's going to do long-term damage to those organs.
Yoichi, I have to ask you a question. Yoichi,
Mm-hmm.
I know you very well now, and you don't sound really like you're feeling that good. You're not feeling very good, I can tell.
Well, yeah. This trip took a beating out of me, So it's, I was in this radioactive rain for days, and then, the cold, the sudden cold that came down due to these weather effects.
Right.
Really, really harsh. Because so basically, I hadn't expected it because it's normally in autumn. Autumn just got erased. We have one day of autumn. We went from a late summer to an early winter suddenly. So clearly Fukushima is having these massive effects on the weather. The loss of the ozone over the Arctic region, this vast ozone hole, seems to be opening up because, as I flew down to Hong Kong and then down to Thailand and then to Malaysia, these weird lightning storms in very, very thin clouds, not dense clouds, were following me all the way, and they continued for many, many days. And so we are seeing basically our protective layer of ozone in the atmosphere really starting to crack apart. And, the scientific community, the meteorologists of the world, are still not facing up to the realities of this. They just don't want to face it. And right now there's a large meeting going on in Doha, Qatar on climate change where, I'm certainly not against reduction of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas. I don't think any of the critics of climate change theory are either. Nobody supports greenhouse gas buildup. It's just that how much of that is related to our current climate change. That's the question. And after Fukushima, I think it's a real concern. And you see the Japanese delegation, they're really backing down on the Kyoto Protocol, even though it was an initial champion, because of the loss of nuclear power. So we do see a correlation in the Japanese behavior at Qatar to the Fukushima disaster. And you get this sense that, in fact, it was power from the nuclear, money from the nuclear power industry, along with the automobile export industry, that really carried this whole Kyoto Protocol all along. And it was a means to support the nuclear industry after Chernobyl. Basically, the Kyoto Protocol was a vast propaganda effort. And I'm not saying that, we shouldn't lower carbon dioxide greenhouse, but I'm just saying is that the kind of centrality it had on world stage and continues to have was very much a part of the defense of the nuclear power industry, which shows the massive amount of money that a monopoly utility, nuclear power is the ultimate monopoly utility in which the public has very little control over pricing, doesn't really know what the real costs are, the real inputs are, and in which large national governments, state governments, very much like the nuclear industry because it's a sure source of taxation. It's non-controversial. They can set tax levels and basically ignore public opinion on others because you still need your electrical power. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't really live without it in a modern world. So this is a vast, monopoly that the governments of the world completely support, and we're seeing that working out in Qatar. And Doha, we have to remember that Qatar is the largest per capita emitter of carbon and other greenhouse emissions. I mean, this is like, I don't know. How do you explain this? This is like holding a meeting for godly human rights in Tel Aviv,
Sure, exactly.
That's sort of like the equivalent,
Network, we're going to go through the break, Network, if you're there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a very important analogy, and people, of course, in this country, as in many, another war in the Middle East, they don't react. Same thing with Fukushima. They don't react, and they should be. Now, you're going to go through your normal detox regimen, and you probably ought to do a double dose. It sounds like it's not getting any better there. We know it isn't. I mean, I'm being facetious. It sounds like it's almost concentrating. As we know, it bioaccumulates,
Well,
and the whole plant is continuing to spew this stuff, so it has to be.
Right. Yeah. So really, you have to take the counter effects to clear it out of the system, and that takes time. And the diet isn't that bad tasting, but it does get a bit boring in the regimen. You got to get your health up to the point where you can get out and run and sweat and all that. So when you're suffering from a chest cold like I am, it's hard to get outside and run without, hacking your lungs out. So these,
right.
It's insidious to be locked in a situation of these multiple effects. So, radiation is a powerful force out there, but it is powerful in many ways that affect your health.
Well, okay. A couple things I want to get you to comment on. One was a story that Fukushima has announced it expects to finish forest decontamination by 2020. How in the world are they going to decontaminate the forests ever?
Well, I will show you when I get a little better and I finish some of these articles I have to do, more for mercenary purposes. I'll get you some videotape on this forest decontamination. Basically, what they're doing is along the edges of roads, because that's where there's been massive buildup of the trucks, blowing through there with leaving dust. Sure. But also, they need to do the sides of the roads for the safety of the emergency workers, nuclear workers, and all, and the local people who are involved in all that work, so that they don't get further, health ill effects. That they're building massive, and I have photos and video of these low-level waste sites, which are huge, like these methane pits, for all this stuff that they cut down on the sides of roads and from the trees and all that. So
got it.
It's a vast effort that they're doing. There's no way they can fix this because, as I've shown before, that radiation comes out of the Pacific Trench, to evaporate out in those low-lying clouds, and it blows into the mountains all across Japan. And so there's a constant buildup. And it comes down the river, down the rivers and river basins, not only as water, but also as downwind sort of clouds and moisture. So it's basically a cycle now. So there is no end point until the half-life of cesium is achieved. There is no end point to the cycle because it's really built in to these environmental factors of why Japan is such a moist country. And with that blessing has now been tapped into by radiation, which again, very insidious because radiation, mimics the very minerals like potassium and salt that our bodies depend upon, magnesium that our bodies depend upon. The things that are normally healthy for us, radiation penetrates.
Right.
So there's really where it's a very insidious substance and never should have been introduced in the first place for power systems. It's just really insane. And unfortunately, we see the global medical community in total denial of the effects of radiation. And this was just released in the second World Health Organization, WHO, cover-up of what's going on in Fukushima. And notably, this most recent one, one of the co-authors, one of the three lead authors, an American named Jewish-American Roy Shore, who is a professor of environmental medicine at the New York University Medical Center in environmental medicine. Now, the thing about Roy Shore and also the head of the WHO, Margaret Chan, is neither one of them is a medical doctor, okay? They're both PhDs in public health. These people have never taken the Hippocratic Oath or treated patients, okay? So we are talking about the world's medical establishment being represented by people who are not doctors. This is the most absurd, This is just totally the most absurd situation.
Yep.
These are basically government hacks.
Par for the course.
Their main job is to cover up it. And as I've discussed with Margaret Chan, we've had experience with her, my medical team in Hong Kong, where we don't hesitate to say she's responsible hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths of people in the SARS because she refused to introduce herbal medicine, even though all the doctors in the city knew that was the only effective way to treat coronavirus, which, by the way, is now appearing, is raising its
coming back. It's
in Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
And as you know, there's a lot of denial there because many Arab people, despite the fact that these two countries pose as the most religiously inclined countries of the world and enforce religious law and practices, hundreds of thousands of their citizens have spent time in Macau, okay, gambling and visiting, being visited, consorting with prostitutes and drinking and, taking drugs and all this stuff. All this bad behavior, which contributes to SARS, and Macau is probably the least safe place in the southern China. complex, Pearl River Delta complex, for this sort of behavior. So not surprising that it shows up in the two most self-proclaimed, most religious emirates of the Middle East. You know, that there's a lot of hypocrisy here that I talk about, you know, in many ways. The flip side of the Israeli hypocrisy in all this area is these people who preach or pretend to be morally better than the rest of us actually engage in some activities some of the rest of us would never do, you know. At least I haven't lost any quarters or dollars, silver dollars in Macau. I don't gamble, you know. I gamble with my life in Fukushima. I don't gamble with the money needed to support that work, you know. So anyway, that's just part of this equation of, you know, the hypocrisies of our time now being worked out at this Doha summit for COP18 on climate change, and also by the World Health Organization. Let's get a little bit more into this Roy Shores background. You know, well, New York University, first of all, most notably, the alma mater of Woody Allen. So if you like horrible jokes, bad humor, go there. And unfortunately, they're playing a very dark joke upon us, because he's the co-chairman on the American side of the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, which studies the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but in a very selective way, okay? It originated with a group which was much more honestly, you know, after the war, Americans, military, which were way more honest about their intentions and goals. You know, it was ruthless war. They didn't blink at the idea. They thought they were justified. And so this committee was originally called the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, okay? In other words, it's to look at the casualties created by the atomic bomb, because the atomic bomb was not designed to be humanitarian. It was designed to kill as many people as possible, as efficiently as possible, either immediately in the first blast or to wipe them out through radiation, you know. And so, you know, the American military were quite honest about that. And I've gone through the archives, the National Archive in Washington. I've looked at a lot of strategic bombing photos. You know, they were looking at very clinically as better ways to kill people, kill the enemy, you know, as many as possible. And so there was at least some honesty there. There wasn't this kind of duplicity about caring about, you know, humanitarian and public health. You know, that well, anyway, in 1975, this committee sort of ran out of a mission. So this geneticist named James Neal of University of Michigan, he raised some research money to continue it on the U.S. side, and then it became a joint U.S.-Japanese project. I think Japanese government provides more money and it was renamed the Radiation Effects Research, the RERF, which has, again, continued this very biased work of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. Basically wanted to see the long-term effects of radiation, you know, how it would mutate people, how it would kill, cause cancers and continue to kill the enemy. The Radiation Effects Foundation tried to give it a humanitarian face, although it, too, did not provide any medical care. These are like very cold-hearted studies of victims without giving them any care. So they were deeply resented. These committees were very deeply resented by the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who were dragged in there to be examined without treatment. Usually, when doctors run things, under the Hippocratic Oath, they're bound by that oath to treat their patients, to relieve the suffering in some ways, and clinical studies are done to advance the cause of medicine. Here, victims only, looked on quite casually to determine if they're dead yet or how soon they will be dead. And also this committee did not look at all the people who died after the blast during the blast in 45 in August, throughout 1950, when a whole bunch of them were killed. It did not look into the death of people who supposedly died from other causes, which could have been pneumonia, any number of other causes. So it's very, very biased research we're seeing. And their argument is that low levels of radiation does not harm people. Okay? That's their basic argument. And this is what the WHO picked up, that there is no threat to any people who live outside of Fukushima, negligible threat. Inside Fukushima, only a few of the population which ingested a lot of radiation in the air primarily, or were exposed to the environment soon thereafter, will be affected, and that school children have just a slightly higher rate of suffering.
Even Arnie Gunderson, Yoichi, even Arnie Gunderson, even Arnie Gunderson is furious at the World Health Organization. He says, I don't trust this data. My guess is that the World Health Organization underestimated the radiological deposition and releases and thus came up with exposures that are too low. Also, I suspect they have omitted hot particles and internal emitters from their dose assumptions.
Absolutely. Well, that's sort of, I think, Engineer Gunderson has just summed it all up there of all the dirty tricks that can be played. We've already clearly established, and this was independently also found by Greenpeace, that all the machines, the monitoring stations are all rigged. Okay? That basically they're set up in a way they don't accurately measure the radiation in their surrounding environment. That was very clear. We documented that, I think, in painstaking details. The other thing is that the food intake has completely been underestimated, as we know, and then that has nothing to do with living inside or outside Fukushima. Some people are just like, they won't give up beef eating, and we know there's high concentration in beef. Other people just like their sushi so much and their fish so much, they haven't paid a lot of attention, nor has a lot of attention been given in the Japanese press to the radiation contamination in food. And as I say, many of these people, because of these enormous price discounts at the cheaper restaurants, are gorging themselves like they never have before on these foodstuffs that would contain a lot of radiation.
Yep,
so
sure.
It's very sickening to see this, to walk by these places and see, the counters packed with people who are looking for a discount and don't mind the we're not talking about long-term risk. We're talking about near-term and mid-term risk of eating this stuff. The water was completely discounted in all WHO studies. The water supply, and you've seen my painstaking reporting. Photos, documentaries, trees.
You're the only one doing it.
Watershed areas for Tokyo. This is the water that goes down to the major cities. And the trees up there, the source of that are these mountains. And the radiation has gone higher than before, at higher elevations than before. So entire watersheds are very, very much affected. And just nothing is being done in that. And we're seeing foreign water, bottled water, Volvic, Evian becoming less and less available in Japan as the stores want to sell more and more Japanese water. But it's very questionable. And as I pointed out before, water is very, very difficult to measure because radiation, like light and other kinds of rays, is reflected in water. And I use German Geiger counters, and the German manufacturer said, your readings will probably be 20 times less than the actual presence of radiation water because of the reflection problem. Mm-hmm. So there's that's why we take readings of algae, plants and all that, and animals around those rivers, and I've shown you very clearly that, there's been very high, disturbingly high readings in the bioaccumulation, which means the water is very much affected by radiation. So basically none of this is getting into the WHO data, and it discredits not just the Japanese government for sourcing material, but it discredits the entire profession in science. Of the medical scientists.
It does. It certainly does. All right.
It goes far beyond the shores of Japan.
Indeed. Yoichi, thank you on behalf of all people who care. You take care of yourself, you hear?
Yeah, will do. All right. Very good, man.
Good night. Yoichi Shimatsu, and even in addition to the cold, I think you can hear he's tired. But that man puts more of himself into the Fukushima crisis than anyone I've heard of who doesn't live in Japan. He goes there of his own volition, bicycles around the worst areas trying to reach out to people and help them. And he reports on Rense.com and many other news services as well. He's a remarkable man. All right, that's our program tonight. We'll be right back with you tomorrow. Have a great day and be well.